How do people make up their minds? How do we decide what to buy, what movies to watch, what politicians to vote for? Do we rely on messages from the media, or do we turn to family and friends? These were questions explored by a group of American sociologists in the mid-1940s when they examined the consumer choices of 800 Midwestern women. Their work would result in one of the most influential mass communication books of the 20th century. This book was Personal Influence, and it almost didn't happen at all.
Personal Influence came out in a climate where people were reading books with titles like The Hidden Persuaders. There was a anxiety in 50s America about advertisers, media pulling one over on us. The isolation of people in suburban America, wondering if America could resist the kind of propaganda that had brought Nazi Germany, for instance, into existence. And so in that context, Personal Influence comes out, and it tells us that actually the people around us, our friends and neighbors, are more influential than the mass media. We had networks, we had flows of influence, we had opinion leaders. So the book brings together these three interesting personalities, Mills and Lazarsfeld, and then the graduate student Elihu Katz.
He came here on a one-year fellowship in 1933, and then there was the Civil War in Vienna, in Austria, and the Social Democrats lost. So it's at that point that he decided to stay here.
But the Bureau was full of German refugees, or Austrian refugees. Paul took them all in, and Paul looked after these orphans in the storm, and you couldn't argue with that.
Lazarsfeld, as you heard, was in some ways not a good lecturer. He didn't prepare, basically. He would come in and talk about what was on his mind at the moment. And while we're on Lazarsfeld as a teacher, he had a theory of methodology which he announced. What is this thing, methodology? We have the classes and all these things that talk about methodology. All it is very simple. I'll explain it to you. Don't cheat. That's methodology.
C. Wright Mills I knew when I was at Wisconsin. He was a graduate student then. And a big blow of wind from Texas. And arrogant and pompous and pontificating and ready to take on the world.
The first day of class, this man strides in wearing his boots, of course, and some lumberjack kind of shirt. He had just published White Collar. On the dust jacket of the back dust jacket of White Collar is a big picture of C. Wright Mills. He comes into class and says, with of course the picture facing the class, for the first time this class has a textbook. Mills was portrayed as anti-bureau, anti-methodology, anti-empiricism, grand theory. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Born in Waco, Texas in 1916, C. Wright Mills was a bundle of contradictions. On the one hand, a brash academic renegade. On the other, a rigorous, thoughtful scholar who would emerge as a leading American intellectual in the 1950s. In 1944, he was a rising star in American sociology and being courted by Columbia University to take the lead in a new study about decision-making.
So he had been establishing something of a reputation at the same time as Paul Lazarsfeld had been working on his own methodology of opinion measurement. So right around the end of 1944, Robert Merton contacted Mills with a suggestion of coming to the Bureau of Applied Social Research, which was still being established at Columbia, and taking charge of a field study in Decatur, Illinois.
So the Bureau of Applied Social Research, 1944, when they start this study, getting funding from all over the place. One of the fun or interesting things about it is that it was funded by True Stories magazine, which had been started by this guy named Bernard McFadden, who was a health food nut and a bodybuilder and an inspirational speaker. And he began this magazine in the 20s that was appealed to working class women and was kind of a confession and romance magazine. So Paul Lazarsfeld, being the entrepreneur that he was, managed to get a grant from True Stories and McFadden Publications to fund the Decatur study, which turned out to be personal influence.
Now a classic in American opinion research, the Decatur study was the brainchild of Paul Lazarsfeld, a European social scientist who was fascinated by how people make choices.
So that Lazarsfeld's earliest interest was in decision making. It got translated when he came to the United States. He had studied decision making in career choice, but when he came to the United States, the big decision-making study that he got into after his early studies of radio was on the role of the mass media in decision-making, in choosing, making a decision in a presidential campaign.
Lazarsfeld and his colleague Robert Merton, both professors of sociology at Columbia, were determined to bring C. Wright Mills into the Decatur Project.
So the collaboration was set by the end of January 1945. Mills was to take charge of the opinion study that Lazarsfeld had designed, and was very excited. His letters are bursting with exuberant exclamations about the nice break given to a young kid his age who had done nothing. He had these great moments of false modesty.
I didn't run into him again until I was at Columbia. And he came, and he was this new star. He was just going to, Lind liked him because he was this sort of indigenous American radical from Texas yet. And everybody liked him, except I didn't like him. But he has an enormous energy.
Mills brought this enthusiasm to the Decatur Project, organizing an ambitious study that interviewed 800 women about their everyday choices.
Most of the interviewers were women. A number of them were women from Decatur. Others were women from the Bureau of Applied Social Research from Columbia. So it's an interesting moment in social history because it's women talking with women and finding out how they make up their minds about marketing, about fashion, about movie going, and about political affairs.